Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Emily Nichols. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Aquatic Resource Mitigation Fund Program Manager. On the call today, representing our ARM team, our ARM is short for Aquatic Resource Mitigation Program. We have Seta Detzel, our Wetlands Mitigation Specialist, and Rachel Harris, our Mitigation Monitoring Specialist. Kendall Fioravante is also on our team, but she is unable to be with us this morning as she's on leave. We're fortunate today to have some of our public information office with us. We have Eddie McKenna on the call, who's available to assist with technical difficulties. This morning, we will provide an overview of the ARM Fund program, details of the 2024 grant, the target projects and goals for this grant round, pre-proposal application materials and resources, and we will end with a question and answer session. So the Aquatic Resource Mitigation Fund program works to sustain the functions and values of aquatic resources in New Hampshire. As the in lieu fee program sponsor, we seek and fund projects that satisfy compensatory mitigation requirements for unavoidable impacts to aquatic resources authorized by state and federal permit decisions. The funds collected are pooled according to the location where the impacts occurred. Funds are made available as competitive grants to fund restoration, enhancement, establishment, and preservation activities within the watersheds where impacts occurred. As the in lieu fee sponsor, DES, or an ARM, manages the collected funds and announces a grant round annually, and that's why we're all here today. Our grant applications are reviewed and evaluated by the ARM Fund Site Selection Committee and a federal interagency review team. The ARM Fund program facilitates the funds programs and manages them, but we do not make funding decisions. Our site selection committee is a team of state and non-governmental conservation agencies and entities with experience in the fields of botany, wetlands ecology, wildlife biology, stream science, as well as restoration activities. The federal interagency review team is composed of representatives from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Environmental Protection Agency, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So our site selection committee and our team review the applications using our evaluation criteria that's outlined in state and federal rule and develop recommendations for funding awards. The funding award recommendations must be approved by the New Hampshire Wetlands Council and the interagency review team. Projects selected for funding must enter into a grant agreement with the Department of Environmental Services, and that has to be approved by Governor and Council before any funds can be dispersed. So our program operates in accordance with our statute and our rules, as well as the federal mitigation rules governing compensatory mitigation and in lieu fee compensatory mitigation programs. The ARM Fund instrument, gonna link on. The ARM Fund instrument is a document that outlines our guidelines, responsibilities, and standards for the use, operation, and maintenance of the fund in compliance with the federal mitigation rules. This document was updated in 2023 and is available on our website if you would like to read more about our program. So since the fund was established in 2006, these mitigation funds have been used to support projects that have resulted in the significant ecological accomplishments that are summarized on this slide. Historically, the ARM Fund has been highly successful in the preservation of aquatic resources and their buffers. However, preservation alone cannot replace lost functions, values, or acreage. To meet the goal of no net loss of wetland functions, ARM is redirecting focus from resource preservation to sustainable restoration and enhancement of aquatic resources. The program's success moving forward will continue to rely and build on the strong partnerships established by previous ARM staff and many of you on the call today, which includes our land trusts, our conservation commissions, restoration practitioners within the state, universities, and other funding sources and agencies. I want to talk about how an in-lieu fee program works. When there are unavoidable impacts to aquatic resources, an in-lieu fee payment into the ARM fund may be made to satisfy state and federal mitigation requirements. The ARM fund accepts an in-lieu fee payment through the sale of a credit and assumes the responsibility to compensate for the lost functions and values. A credit is defined as a functional unit of a wetland or stream that can be gained or lost. Its value is based on the resource type, the nature of the activities, and the type of mitigation activities. So compensatory mitigation projects funded through ARM generate credits, and we strive to achieve that no net loss of aquatic resource functions and values. This graphic represents what I just covered, just a little differently, and I think it clarifies some things. So when credits are sold to a permittee via an in lieu fee payment for negative impacts to resources, the permittee receives their state or federal permit, and the responsibility for compensatory mitigation transfers to the ARM Fund program as the program sponsor. Credits are then generated via ARM grant projects that will restore, enhance, establish, or preserve aquatic resources and targeting the functions and values that were lost through the permitted activities. Credits are sold at a lower ratio than they are compensated for. So this means that it requires a greater area to be restored, enhanced, or created and preserved to compensate for a relatively small area. For example, one credit sold for 1 acre of wetland fill will require the creation of 3 acres of wetland to generate the same credit. And when preservation is involved, it takes approximately 20 acres of wetland protection to compensate for that 1 credit. And so that I just wanted to provide that context to explain our shift towards restoration. So as you all know, this is why we're here today. ARM is now accepting pre-proposals for our 2024 grant round. This year, we have $5.5 million available across 5 watersheds. This is our flyer that summarizes the grant round, how to apply, key criteria, target projects, and provides links to all of the grant materials and resources we'll cover today. Identifying projects that will generate credits to offset the impacts and provide a measurable aquatic resource lift and increase functions at the landscape and watershed scale. It's a challenge. And moving forward, I just want to emphasize that our team and partners will continue to strive to meet the goal of no net loss of aquatic resource functions, as well as meeting that high bar standard that's been set by the program in the past for aquatic restoration and preservation in the state. In 2023 and 2024, our program's been working to better define the restoration goals and limited preservation only projects that will be eligible for funds, and that's what we'll be providing an overview of today. So, our 2024 grant round is prioritizing projects that will support aquatic resource restoration, enhancement, establishment, and in certain circumstances, preservation to offset the functions and values authorized by federal and state permit decisions. The goal is for funded projects to be self-sustaining natural systems within the landscape and climate in which they're located that require little or no ongoing maintenance or hydrologic manipulation. ARM is targeting non-tidal and tidal wetland and stream projects to compensate for lost functions and values in the 5 service areas here. Oops, I can't find my mouse. So that includes the Merrimack, the Pemigewasset, Winnipesaukee, Lower Connecticut, Salmon Falls, Piscataqua, and Saco River watersheds. This table here summarizes the funding amounts that are available, as well as the target resources that we're looking to offset. So in the Merrimack, we are looking for wetland and stream restoration projects, whereas in the Saco, we're looking for stream only. Our ledger summarizes the unavoidable aquatic resource impacts and losses that trigger compensatory mitigation in accordance with state and federal rules. It also summarizes the functions, values, and target resources types that ARM strives to offset in the 2024 grant round. This ledger is a great tool to reference what kind of mitigation and credit generation is needed within the select service areas and what we're seeking to offset. I just want to highlight again in the Merrimack, you'll notice that there is a substantial amount of funds available. Much of this is carryover from last year as we did not receive any grant applications. So we are looking to offset over 14 acres of wetland loss and 2,500 linear feet of stream loss. When you're looking to see if you have a project that fits, if you have a project that can compensate significant wetland and stream loss in the Merrimack, definitely look at the functions and values we're targeting, and then use the other resources that we'll outline in the next few slides. So our 2024 grant program guidance and instructions contains all the information and details you'll need to know about the 2024 grant round and pre-proposal requests. It includes the grant round's goals and objectives, available funding, the eligibility criteria, eligible costs, and application materials, as well as our schedule. I'm now going to hand things over to Seta, who will provide an overview of and details on each of the project categories and criteria we're targeting this year.
Thank you, Emily. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. As Emily said, my name is Seta Detzel. I'm a wetland mitigation specialist in the ARM Fund program. Thank you for that overview. And so now I'm going to cover our 2024 project types, provide some examples, and then hand it back over to Emily for the last section. The goal of this year's grant round is to offset the loss functions and values of aquatic resources through funding 4 different project types: wetland restoration and enhancement, stream restoration or enhancement, wetland establishment, also called creation, and land preservation only. These 4 categories are repeated throughout all our guidance, outreach materials, and forms for the 2024 round. I'll cover each project category, provide some examples, and highlight important criteria for these projects to ensure that applicants can decide whether ARM is the right funding source for their project. Before we get into each category, I do want to highlight how each of these ties in with the permanent conservation of land. So for categories 1, 2, and 3, restoration, enhancement, and creation, those all have the primary goal of increasing or enhancing aquatic resources on the landscape. These project types must include permanent protection of the project area, and therefore they all have preservation as a secondary outcome. For land preservation projects only, category 4, the goal of the project is strictly to preserve very high value, high function land that contains difficult to replace aquatic resources. We'll get into what that means. All ARM Fund projects include existing or proposed protections, but land preservation projects do not include restoration, enhancement, or creation activities. So knowing where your project falls is going to determine how you assess its eligibility and how the Site Selection Committee and IRT review your project. This next slide summarizes the minimum eligibility requirements for all restoration, enhancement, and creation projects. You'll see this information repeated within the 2024 guidance and instructions. So those first 2 check marks, restoration, enhancement, creation projects need to result in a measurable aquatic resource lift and increase in functions at the landscape and watershed scale, and include a minimum of 5 years of post-construction and annual monitoring and reporting. The performance monitoring is core to the ARM Fund's mission. It is used to ensure that functions and values are self-sustaining and truly providing the offset for losses. Applicants should be prepared to work with ARM to identify suitable performance standards, and to develop a monitoring plan for their project. Monitoring will vary by project type and scope, but typical monitoring can include cross-sectional and longitudinal stream measurements, fish surveys, vegetation and soil surveys, and function and/or condition assessments pre and post. So depending on the system's response to the restoration, enhancement, creation activities, adaptive management or additional monitoring may be necessary. That third check mark, all restoration enhancement projects need to include permanent protection of the project area. I touched on this on the last slide. I just want to note that riverine systems can be challenging when it comes to permanent protections. So we can absolutely review these on a case-by-case project. And then um, projects on lands that have existing permanent protections already are eligible for ARM funding. So we do encourage assessments and proposals to restore aquatic resources that are already under legal protections. Lastly, all these projects need to include the required documentation of the grant reference checklist. Emily is going to show this further on. It's a new tool we've developed this year, and we've identified what's a requirement versus what's a recommendation, and the phases in the grant round where those items become requirements versus recommendations. It's designed to give some predictability of what might be involved for a given project type. For example, wetland delineation would be a recommendation for the pre-proposal, not a requirement, but it would be a requirement for the full proposal. So we hope that helps with planning. So with these overarching requirements summarized, let's get back to the project types. Funding is available to restore the functions of degraded or altered wetlands. This year, there's funding to restore freshwater wetlands throughout the Lower Connecticut, Merrimack, and Pemigewasset and Winnipesaukee service areas, and both freshwater and tidal wetlands in the Salmon Falls, Piscataqua service areas. Restoration enhancement can include a variety of different work. I was going to read this. I don't know if I should in the interest of time. Um, I guess I'll summarize briefly. Excuse me. Um, so yeah, generally reversing impacts to aquatic resources due to historic land alteration, which could include fill, the installation of hard armoring, interruptions in hydrologic connectivity. It's restoring aquatic organism passage by reconnecting degraded aquatic habitat. It could be enhancing the resources through plantings and invasive management, barrier removals, benefiting wildlife in wetlands through targeted on-site enhancement measures. That's a broad kind of open-ended category, something like in-stream wood additions could potentially come under that, although that's not the best example because that's more for stream restoration. But that's open-ended deliberately because we recognize there are all types of aquatic resource enhancements for wildlife out there that we might not necessarily be aware of. And living shoreline and habitat restoration enhancement projects in coastal wetlands. So deciding whether ARM is the right fit for you. We do point out that restoration that's the result of contemporary land management practices is not eligible for ARM funding. We recognize the need to restore all degraded wetlands, but these sites where contemporary land activities have contributed to the degradation are more complicated situations beyond ARM's capacity to resolve. So here's an example of the title. ARM funded this project as a living shoreline project at Wagon Hill Farm in Durham in 2018 to address shoreline erosion and salt marsh loss at an accelerated rate, as you can see in the picture on the left. The project restored an area of salt marsh and tidal buffer through the installation of a living shoreline. That project is complete. I believe they're starting to plan phase 2, and this resulted in a whole host of restored functions and values. On this next slide, this was the Lithia Springs project in Londonderry. This was funded by ARM in 2022. It had a big land preservation component, 54 acres, including 18 acres of wetlands, 3 vernal pools and their upland buffers, and over 2,000 linear feet of streams. It did include a relatively small-scale restoration effort, but that did have significant functional lift due to its location in Tier 1 habitat, Wildlife Action Plan Tier 1 habitat, and within the Pennachuck Source Water Protection Area. So you can see in the picture on the left, the orange is the boundaries of the conservation parcel, blue is the limits of the aquatic resources, and then that linear feature, the purple in the lower left, it was a historic causeway that was, bifurcating connectivity between wetlands in that area. So the project included removal and restoration of 7,000 square feet of wetlands. So pretty small scale, but these add up on the landscape and are absolutely eligible for ARM funding. The second category, stream restoration and enhancement projects. So funding is available to restore the functions of degraded or altered streams and rivers in the Merrimack, Pemigewasset, Winnipesaukee, Saco, and Salmon Falls, Piscataqua service areas. Stream restoration enhancement can include restoring natural flow regimes, reconnecting impassable or degraded aquatic habitat and organism passage, reversing the historic impacts of dredging, diversion, or straightening, improving lateral connectivity, and removing barriers that result in stream restoration within barrier footprints and former impoundments. So a note on stream restoration and deciding whether ARM is the right funding source for your project. We do note that bank stabilization projects are not eligible for ARM funding unless the work is part of a comprehensive stream restoration proposal and the erosion is it's not, again, not the result of contemporary land management practices. So ARM does not consider bank stabilization in itself an end goal of restoration. It's a secondary result of a more comprehensive stream restoration. I'm sure there's going to be interest in understanding the eligibility of culvert replacement projects as stream restoration or enhancement projects. ARM has funded many of these in recent years, and we recognize the substantial benefits they provide to aquatic resource functions and values. This year, our guidance better defines the types of stream crossing replacement projects that will be competitive. In order to be competitive for funds, stream crossing replacements need to be designed to be invisible to the system, essentially, and have enhancement targets that extend really just beyond the correction of a perch and the immediate flood hazard caused by an undersized crossing. So to meet this, crossings do need to be designed to meet the New Hampshire Stream Crossing Guidelines. This is a 2009 publication, specifically Chapter 3, titled Design Guidelines for New Stream Crossings. These guidelines use the Rosgen stream type to define the appropriate crossing width and size based on the geometry of the stream type, including the flood-prone width and the entrenchment ratio. So to get into some examples, this is an example of a recently constructed ARM-funded project located. Oh, can you advance, Emily? Thank you. On the Oyster River in Barrington, this was flood hazard mitigation was certainly a goal of the project, but it was, in this case, it was secondary to restoring the stream bed form and function. Construction was completed in 2023. It will be monitored for 5 years. Monitoring is going to be conducted annually to ensure that the performance standards are achieved. It's going to include biological monitoring for brook lamprey, floodplain vegetation monitoring, and stream cross sections and longitudinal profiles. On the next slide, these are photos on the left, pre and post conditions, looking downstream at the Lumberland Creek Culvert Project on Bay Road in Newmarket. This was another stream crossing replacement project, and this one had significant stream enhancement and tidal marsh enhancement goals. This project was funded in part by ARM. It just completed its 5th year of monitoring, shown on the right. The project removed the tidal restriction, which resulted in restored aquatic connectivity, enabling diadromous fish passage, and it enhanced the resilience of the Lumberland Creek salt marsh, which is a New Hampshire exemplary natural community. And it now allows for marsh migration and tidal exchange. We recognize that both this and the last example on the Oyster River involve stream crossing upgrades. That's not because that's solely what the ARM Fund is soliciting by any means, but these have been completed recently, and they represent crossings that would be competitive in 2024. We currently have many dam removal, stream restoration projects in the works as well. We recognize that stream enhancement can take a wide variety of forms, and we encourage a variety of proposals to restore stream systems. The third category, this is going to be pretty short and sweet, is wetland establishment and creation in uplands. So creation can include development of emergent or scrub shrub wetlands, or the creation of vernal pools. These projects should be designed to be appropriate for the landscape in which they're designed and eventually self-sustaining. They require professional expertise to site, design, monitor, and provide adaptive management to ensure success. And ARM encourages wetland creation proposals. Please note that wetland creation that provides a stormwater treatment function is not eligible. These constructed wetlands do require maintenance. This is an ARM-funded vernal pool creation enhancement project that was part of a greater land protection effort of 110 acres known as the Tickner Woodlands Addition in Lebanon. There was an opportunity to increase the wildlife habitat function of the scrub shrub wetland that had formed in the old Hall Road. $10,000 was awarded to complete the vernal pool creation enhancement. And after 5 years, the vernal pool on the right was providing habitat for breeding amphibians. Okay, this is my last slide, and it's the last but not least by any means. ARM has funding available for land preservation projects that have no restoration, enhancement, or creation activities. In certain circumstances, ARM can fund protection of aquatic resources and their buffers. The Site Selection Committee evaluation criteria, which is many of you on the call will know about it. It's also it's embedded within our guidance and instructions this year. There's links to it on our website. It's the scoring criteria for the projects that the IRT and SSC use. So that evaluation criteria describes how land protection projects will be the most competitive. So by contributing to landscape connectivity and being identified as a conservation priority in conservation planning. And there's a number of other criteria for scoring, but we do want to provide some additional recommendations, again, reflected in the guidance this year, that ensure that a preservation only project will compete well with restoration projects. So preservation sites should be free from land uses that may affect long-term levels of functions and sustainability. We can talk about what that means during Q&A if folks want to. Project partners, so your landowners and easement holders, must be willing to accept ARM's limited use restrictions and conditions, including long-term stewardship and monitoring. We do have a conservation easement template. Again, I think this is either linked or embedded within our guidance. It should be pretty readily available to help with planning and predictability. And next, preservation sites should contain these difficult to replace aquatic resources. So what those are are documented vernal pools in their upland buffers, documented bogs, salt marsh or area for salt marsh migration, sand dunes, habitat for federal or state listed wildlife species, state listed plant species or exemplary natural communities, or intact undisturbed floodplain wetlands adjacent to Tier 3, Tier 4 streams. That Tier 3, Tier 4, if you have questions on that, you can ask us. That comes from the rules. It's your freshwater. It's all tidal riverine systems, and it's your freshwater riverine systems that are greater than 1 acre in drainage area. And the last item is that preservation parcels that are comprised of at least 50% aquatic resources relative to uplands are going to be more competitive. This gets into credit generation that Emily was touching on earlier. The wettest parcels essentially are going to generate the most credits, so something else to keep in mind. So with that, I'm handing it back over to Emily to review the pre-proposal form itself, plus some materials and resources for applicants. Thank you.
Thank you, Seta. Great job. That was a lot of information to cover. So let's dive into pre-proposal timelines. So here's a quick overview of the pre-proposal phase of the grant round. Pre-proposal applications must be submitted by May 31st. Applications, once they're submitted, will be reviewed and evaluated by the Site Selection Committee and intergovernmental review team. We will be conducting preliminary site visits of some of these sites and arranging those with applicants in early June. Once we've done our preliminary screening, the Site Selection Committee and Interagency Review Team will provide individual feedback for the proposed projects and recommendations on which projects should proceed with submitting a full application, as well as some feedback on how to improve your application and its competitiveness. So this year, the pre-proposal form is available electronically through the New Hampshire online form platform, and applicants will have multiple options for submitting the application, which will include you could submit it electronically through the N-Form platform, or you can download a fillable version of the form. The N-Form platform does require a user registration and login. We have basic information and frequently asked questions on the right-hand side of our form landing page. For forms that are submitted electronically, the information provided in the pre-application will pre-populate select sections of the full proposal, and this will save time for the applicants, and it will also ensure that you're providing all of the required information. ARM will accept downloaded forms as well. You can email those to ARM, or you can mail them the old-fashioned way with the Postal Service. The landing page, this is what we refer to as the landing page. It's got, widely linked throughout our guidance documents as well as our website. So this is what the downloaded version of the pre-proposal form looks like. It consists of 8 brief sections. The information within the form is designed to mirror the requirements of our wetland rules as well as the grant guidance. Information, you need project information, applicant information, project partners and roles, overall funding plan, the project type, which are those categories Seta went over, as well as signature of the property owner. So the pre-proposal attachment section outlines the required and recommended information to include. For the project narrative, you'll notice we're requesting a project overview plus a narrative specific to the applicable project type. So for each project type, you may have to provide a little bit more information to see how it fits in and meets those restoration goals for the grant round. Here's just an example of a narrative. The narrative should paint a clear picture of the project. Where is it located? What's the background? What are the project goals and objectives? A summary of the aquatic resources on site, a description of the proposed scope, an anticipated outcome, including the quantities of resources to be restored and functional improvements, or in the sake of preservation, what are those high functioning resources that need to be protected? And, emphasize that there is little to no restoration or enhancement opportunities on the parcel because it is optimal function. So this is new this year. This is our reference checklist. It's a tool just to outline the requirements for the different phases of the grant process to help applicants with planning, budgeting, and anticipating your needs. So it includes the required versus recommended documents at the different stages. So we have our pre-proposal stage, our full proposal stage, and our awarded project stage. So it also includes the requirements for restoration and enhancement projects as well as land protection. And this is available on our website in the guidance documents as well. This slide just the other one was hard for me to read, so I just put it in a different format. So this is what's required at the pre-proposal stage. We need your application form, project narrative, budget, some different maps, acknowledgement from the landowner, an easement holder letter, as well as the conservation and restoration goals. These are recommended documentation. Delineation map is recommended, not required, as well as the functional assessments. Site photos are highly recommended because a photo's worth 1,000 words. If you have design plans, submit those. For preservation only projects, we are strongly recommending that you have a functional assessment that demonstrates that this qualifies as a preservation project, meeting that high bar standard. And now's the time to be confirming and getting documentation that the parcel does in fact contain confirmed vernal pools and other difficult to replace resources. So this slide just outlines the eligible expenses so that you can get reimbursed through our funding program. We recommend that applicants consider all potential costs to ensure adequate funding secured to complete your project and meet the long-term protection and monitoring requirements. You'll notice adaptive management and financial assurances are included in there, and we do recommend that you strongly consider during your project to make sure you have adequate funds to complete the project. So when it comes to planning your budget, again, we caution applicants to be conservative and include your planning costs, design, permitting, engineers, as well as your assessments, surveys, delineations, your construction costs, so equipment, materials, erosion controls, project management, legal fees, and the long-term protection mechanisms. Again, adaptive management and contingencies, financial assurances in the event unanticipated issues happen during construction. And then again, make sure you have adequate funds for monitoring, because that's how we measure the success of these projects. So all of the funding components must be part of a complete project. So a cradle to grave project with a set schedule for deliverables. We can fund phase projects, and we're happy to meet with you to discuss that. So within our pre-proposal form, there's a budget template that includes eligible costs and tasks for restoration and preservation projects. I know you probably can't read this because I can't even see it on the big screen in front of me. But this is a proposed example budget, and we're happy to talk you through the budget aspect of your project as well. So new to us, and this is the work of Kendall Fioravante, who can't join us today, but this is a new mapping tool. The ARM project planning tool offers a single source for the suite of data layers used by potential ARM applicants for researching project eligibility, developing your proposals, and producing the map projects that are required for the pre-proposal and full grant proposal applications. So this tool, it includes all of the layers that are requested. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for the maps you need to provide with your pre-proposal and full proposal application. The planning tool was designed for easy navigation and customization of the data layers. The layers are grouped into collapsible and expandable headers and can be turned on and off individually. The legend is displayed within the layer list and can be turned on and off for individual layers or entire groups. And the map screen is a location search field with base maps and a button to add your data, so you can upload shape files if you have them. And then right here is how you can access a tutorial on the mapping program, as well as sharing options and printing tools. And so now we're just, here's our timeline. So we've announced pre-proposals. We're here for the office hour, and thank you again for joining us. I know it's a lot of information we've covered. Pre-proposals are due May 31st. Once we receive the pre-proposals, ARM will work with our site selection committee and the inter-review an IRT to screen the projects, set up preliminary site visits, and then provide recommendations back to applicants. We hope to provide that information back to any applicants by mid-July. Our full application deadline is September 15th. And from there, we will do additional analysis, conduct additional site visits if needed, and screen and score those applications in November. In December, we will seek approval from from IRT as well as the Wetlands Council, and we hope to announce awards by the end of December. And then from there, we go into a whole different phase, but I won't overwhelm you too much right now. So with that, thank you for sitting through all of this, and we will open up for questions. Are there any questions?
Hi, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. If there was a preservation project and a conservation commission, like it needed to happen in a more timely manner where some funds were used from the fund, for instance, like the conservation fund, would that be possible to get recompensated for that part?
So you're talking about a project that maybe the threat of development is immediate, and so you need to acquire the property?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and then you would seek funds from ARM to put a conservation easement on that property?
Yeah, and then and then the monitoring and so on as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it sounds like so we can't use our funds to protect already protected land, but we can, you can, if you need to secure acquisition or a purchase and sales agreement. I think that might be one we want to talk about to make sure it fits. There's at this stage in the game, we don't know what we'll see. So any preservation project will have to compete against any restoration project as well. So perhaps we should set up a meeting to talk about that one.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, and so my contact information is up here, so just shoot me an email. Sometimes it takes me a little bit to get back, but I will get back to you, and you always give me a friendly nudge. That's sometimes needed too.
Thank you. Awesome.
Hi, Emily.
Hi.
Thank you for having this webinar. It's very helpful. I was curious about the amount of acreage that is listed that you're hoping to restore, or the linear feet, of restoration. Is that in your, how does that factor into like the 3-to-1 calculation that you said? Are you sort of prioritizing larger, like those projects that achieve a greater proportion of those sort of targets? Do you know what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, so, we will, I think those projects that can provide a significant functional lift to the system may be more competitive. So projects that will open up a larger length of stream, free-flowing water and AOP, aquatic organism passage, sorry, may be more competitive. But again, it depends on each individual project, the system, and the type of restoration that's occurring.
Right, because function and size may not be correlated necessarily, right? So you want to ensure that, that function is really the priority, not size.
Yeah, so the function, it's a balance of functional lift and credit generation, I'd say, that we have to consider when we're scoring these.
Right, and the credit generation is about size.
And the credit generation is, yeah, it is about size, but it's also about the type of restoration and activity that's happening, or type of mitigation that's happening. So preservation is 1 to 20. Restoration, I want to say, is at 1 to 3. I think Taylor Bell's on the call, so I don't know if Taylor wants to jump in.
Yeah, no, that's all correct. Can you hear me, Emily?
Yep. Thanks, Taylor.
Yeah, and you're correct that we want to be capturing greater function and greater lift increasing with our projects. But there's also, if you have a 20-acre restoration site, it's going to meet watershed needs at a much higher rate than a half acre or 1 acre. When you're repairing the environment on a larger scale, there's going to be a higher lift return, and so those larger projects do that. However, if there is a smaller project that is restoring higher function, then that's also considered, and so we welcome those projects as well. It automatically doesn't get pushed away if it's a relatively quote unquote poor enhancement project over 100 acres versus a high quality restoration for like 5 or 10 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And what about what's the equivalency with actual wetland creation? Is that just 1-to-1 then, or?
So creations, it depends on the type of creation. Forested wetlands is the most difficult and takes the longest amount of time to create. I think that's a 5-to-1 ratio, and emergent and scrub shrub wetlands are a 3-to-1 ratio for creation.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's see. I think someone else has their hand up. Hi, Mark. Oh, we can't hear you. Try. Yeah. Unless you're just. Okay, you'll type it in. Okay. All right. While he's typing that, why don't we go to the next question? So, Anne?
Hi, yeah, sorry, I was late. I was coming from a board meeting, so I apologize for missing the first about 10 minutes. Two questions. I did want to learn more about for land preservation projects. It said that land needs to be free from land use practices that may affect long-term levels of functions and sustainability. So I'd like to hear more about that first. So I guess I'll stop there.
Okay, so we're just looking for preservation parcels shouldn't have land use management or practices that conflict with the conservation goals or conflict with kind of our rules and long-term stewardship of the site. So I think, that could mean active agricultural use. We don't want pasturing of animals within the easement areas. But an easement it's a negotiation. So if we're targeting the preservation and protection for aquatic resources and their buffers. So for large parcels of land, I'd say if there's areas that landowners want to continue to manage, we just need to talk about, are those exclusions from the easement area, to avoid conflict. I know we do have pretty limited use, restricted use within the aquatic resources and buffers. But at the same time, we have some flexibility for how areas outside of that are managed. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I was guessing agriculture was going to be one of your examples. I'd be curious to know if there are others, but other sort of just typical ones. But are you saying that even if there is agriculture that is not anywhere near the buffer or within the buffer, that you would still want those excluded, even if they were, like, if it was a larger property and it was quite far away from where the aquatic resources were? So are you still saying you'd want them excluded?
So I'd say case by case basis.
Okay. We
definitely would have a conversation. In 2022, there was a parcel that came in for grant funds. It is the Clark Ridge Farm in Goffstown, and they have active agricultural use, but they also have extensive aquatic resources. And so what we did, they received an LCHIP grant, and we got creative. And we actually ended up having 2 easement areas, and one was the aquatic resource and buffer easement. And so that was all of the wetlands and stream system had different restrictions from the larger parcel to ensure that land use would not conflict with our conservation requirements. So another activity, it's New Hampshire, we have a lot of trees, so forestry, we do like to restrict forestry activity and management within the aquatic resource buffer areas. So that would mean, I think that's, another good example to kind of discuss is if you have a large parcel of land, we'd be looking to avoid timber harvesting within those aquatic resources and the buffers. If there are existing skid roads, we'll write that into the easement, but we really want to preserve things in a natural state that's, kind of void of human activity.
Okay, but it's at least with forestry, it's in the buffer, not across the entire parcel. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's buffer specific.
Okay. My second question, and I don't know if you covered this, and it's been a bit since I've applied for an ARM grant, but presumably ARM only covers 50% of total costs. Is that true?
So we do not have a match requirement.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
We do, but we do encourage it.
Okay.
It's always, these projects are expensive and require a partnership. So matching contributing funds are reflected in the scoring criteria, as well as partnerships and local community support.
Okay, I had forgotten that. That's great. I think those were my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mark, did you get your mic back? No. And I don't know if I can get close enough to read your lips. Let's see, is it in the chat?
There are some other things in the chat.
Okay, there are other things in the chat. So what legal interest will the state hold for grant-funded fee acquisitions? For example, an executive interest. So for land protection, we would hold third-party rights of enforcement interests. So we would for fee acquisition, you know, we require that entity separate from the landowner hold the conservation interest or easements on the property, and then DES as well as potential other funding sources would have to hold third-party rights of enforcement. I don't know if that, just raise your hand or shout out if you have a additional follow-up question. Mark, wetland delineation is an expensive item for larger sites if you're requiring survey level flagging. Can other methods be used? Yes. So our rules, I think it's size dependent, but you can use, if you have LiDAR data, in certain circumstances, you know, we would be willing to accept it, but we'd want to talk about it first, and we'd also want to review it with the Army Corps and make sure that they're willing to accept whatever delineation standard you're using. Let's see, permits are also a new item for stream crossing improvements. So with all information required in these guidance documents, isn't enough information being submitted to approve the work. So this is, Mark, excellent question. Our projects do require compliance with state and federal wetland rules. So if your project is a restoration project, it still may require state and federal permitting. ARM will work with the applicants and grant recipients to try to streamline the projects. We cannot do the permitting for you or approve your permits, but we can facilitate meetings to help review those projects efficiently and make sure that all of the ARM funding requirements associated with our restoration projects are incorporated into your project permits. I want to emphasize that for pre-proposals for restoration projects in these larger parcels, it's not required. It's recommended, and you know, you do have to meet the rules for permit applications throughout the process. But you can submit a grant fund with preliminary desktop analysis of your wetland boundaries and resources. And then any delineation, any functional assessments would be eligible for reimbursement once if a grant is awarded and once funds are secured and gone through GNC. So all of this project planning, design, permitting, they are eligible for funding. You just have to have the grant agreement in place to seek reimbursement on those. So Mark, if I didn't answer your question, just add more.
So do we include filing fee in that?
Filing fees into the budget? Absolutely. That's the permit fees, the design planning fees, as well as, for restoration projects, you're going to need an as-built plan, as well as the monitoring plans. So all of these costs should be included in your overall project budget. And for any project, I know Taylor said it, if you have a project in mind, reach out and we will schedule a meeting. We'll coordinate with the Corps so we can talk about, whether it's a good fit for ARM and what requirements would be and our recommendations for when to, proceed with those requirements. Is there a plan to integrate the wetland project planning tool and the ARM fund planning tool? Yes, we realize there's a lot of mappers out there. We wanted to create something that was a one-stop shop for the data layers that ARM requires in our pre-proposal and full proposal. So we created kind of our little version, but we are talking about kind of big picture, how to use all of these different mappers and make sure that folks can access this information readily and in one place.
As far as if there was a wildlife assessment done, but it was like specifically they called out that because of the time of year that there was not a confirmed vulnerable on that property, like just because they haven't looked at species yet, does that would that disqualify that wildlife assessment?
So you're like you have a potential vernal pool on a property.
Yeah, like I feel confident it's a vernal pool, but I can't say that because I don't have because it was done out of that time of year.
Okay, so I would recommend that you start taking a look now. It's, that season is upon us to confirm that that these sites are in fact vernal pools, and these are difficult to replace resources, and we want to protect them. Costs to have a wetland scientist or ecologist go out there and confirm the presence of the pool would be eligible once if grant funds were awarded and a agreement was in place. I've heard that things are on the move already, so that's why I would encourage you to reach out to someone and see if you can get that confirmation.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have questions? And again, our contact information is here. We are happy to meet with you and talk about potential projects and answer your questions. This is definitely our program's evolving. We are kind of, lessons learned every year with these restoration projects, and that's, that's one of the why we require monitoring is to assess the functions of our projects, but also, so we can learn as these projects develop. So does anyone have anything else to add? All right, well, again, thank you everyone for joining us today. On behalf of ARM and DES, we appreciate all your time. We look forward to seeing your applications and have a wonderful day and weekend. Thank you.